When I think about teachers who had a lifelong impact on me, there are two who come to mind. The first is Bob Gaudino, who was a professor of mine at Williams College. If you wanted to be an honors major in political science, you had to take a seminar from him in the spring of your sophomore year. And it was a seminar called Methods, that's all it was called. And it was held in a little room in a small white clapboard building on the campus of Williams College. On the top floor, there were only 10 of us, and we sat around a table. And I remember this moment as if it was yesterday, even though it was over 50 years ago. Gaudino was a small man with big, huge eyes that would bulge when he got excited. And he was talking about Spinoza, as I remember it. And he asked me a question. This was an oval table, and he was sitting at one end, and I was sitting at the other end. And he asked me a question, and I answered what Spinoza had said or something. And then he leaned across the table, and he said to me, "But what does that have to do with you, Mr. Linsky?" And it was the first time in my years of education that it ever occurred to me that what I was learning had anything to do with me personally, instead of just trying to get a good grade and get on to the next step. And it was this powerful moment for me, and it completely changed my life. And it changed the way I thought about learning, the way I thought about education, the way I thought about what I was doing at school. It was a profound moment. And Gaudino had this facility, this belief that real learning comes from moments of discomfort. He wrote about uncomfortable learning. That was a very uncomfortable moment for me, and it has stuck with me all these years. The second moment that I think of was really not in a formal teaching situation, but I consider one of my greatest teachers a man named Elliot Richardson. People may remember him. He was the Attorney General who quit in what is now known as the Saturday Night Massacre in 1974. Before Nixon got impeached, when Nixon tried to get him to fire the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, and Richardson was Attorney General. But long before that, Richardson was the Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts. He was my first campaign manager when I ran for office. He was my mentor, and he was my first boss. And I remember this moment again, even though it took place 50 years ago, as if it was yesterday. He asked me to do a memo for him on some subject, and I handed it in a couple of days later. We had a very small staff in the Lieutenant Governor's office. And I handed it in, and 5 minutes later, it came back to me, and it didn't have any comments on it or anything. And I took it back to his assistant, and I said, "I think Elliot sent this in by mistake. Will you send it back into him?" And she said, "Sure." And then by the time I got back to my desk, which was only 50 feet away, the intercom was buzzing, and it was him on the intercom, and he said, "Get in here." And I went into his office, and he was a very smart man. He was also, when he got angry, his jaw would bulge. And he said, "Why did you send this back to me?" And I said, "Well, you hadn't looked at it because there were..." He said, "Why did you think I hadn't looked at it?" And I said there were no comments on it. He said, "Oh, I looked at it all right. I looked at it long enough to know that it's not your best work. I can only improve your best work about 5%. So anything more is a waste of my time. So take this back, and when it's your best work, you send it back into me." That was a very powerful experience for me, because it said two things to me. First of all, it said that your job is to do your best work. And that sometimes is hard when you can get by without doing your best work. But the second thing, the thing that's really stuck with me, is that people who are committed to you can deliver harsh truths to you because they come from a place of support and not a place of judgment. And what I found in my personal life and in my professional life since then is that if I believe in someone, then they can hear criticism, they can hear critical comment in a way they can't if they feel it comes from a place of judgment. So those were lessons that were really powerful with me, and even though they took place a half a century ago, they live for me today in the spirit of both of those men.